The Sims is a fantastic franchise that allows you to engage in wish fulfillment and give your little computer people the idealized life you wish you had. Of course, due to these games' open-ended nature, it's also possible to go in the exact opposite direction and introduce some cold hard reality to the citizens of SimCity. And to illustrate this point, I've decided to do a good old-fashioned Orphan challenge, which is exactly what it sounds like. While you can do this in any of the games, like usual, I'm going with The Sims 2 because it's my personal favorite, and I don't need much of an excuse to boot it up. So just how did Sherry and her younger siblings Gary and Carrie end up in this whole predicament? Well, their father, Barry, was a bit of an absent-minded guy, and while out looking at the clouds, as he often did, he was crushed by a satellite which apparently fell from orbit. I know it's crazy, right? What are the odds?
My God is a vengeful God.
As you'd expect, the whole family took this pretty hard. Their mother, Mary, attempted to hold it together and put up a strong facade for her kids, but it was pretty obvious that she wasn't exactly in the right state of mind. So while the children were inside and distracted with their video game, Mary decides to go for a dip in the pool and just never comes out. So yeah, it was a pretty rough day for the kiddos. Now they do have an Uncle Steve, and while he's a pretty cool guy, he currently has no desire to abandon his bachelor lifestyle.
Please don't tell anyone how I live.
So Sherry suddenly finds herself cast in the role of caregiver for her younger siblings, which also required her to work on her maintenance skills so she'd be able to keep everything in the house in working order. In addition to all that, she still had to manage to stay on top of her homework, and when she had the time, she would even help Gary and Carrie out with their studies on occasion. And to add even more onto her plate, while Carrie was able to effectively repress her trauma and funnel it into creative outlets like a regular person, Gary was a moody little bitch who was constantly all up in his feelings, so he required even more of Sherry's attention and, more importantly, energy. As you can imagine, all of this stress did begin to take its toll on both her physical and mental well-being, but like any unsung hero, she did her job without expecting any thanks or credit and suffered in silence. Well, for the most part. There was that one incident where she smashed the kid's dollhouse in a fit of rage, but it did seem to get the message across, and to their credit, Carrie and Gary did begin to pitch in where they could. And it was a good thing too, because while the Scamp family was initially able to survive off the money they made from pawning off the satellite that had crushed their dad, the bills quickly added up, all the food they were constantly scarfing down wasn't free, and Sherry might have bought herself a car just because. With the family's funds running low, Sherry wastes little time seeking employment, but this creates a major problem as she's forced to hire a nanny to avoid any visits from that pesky social worker. Now, leaving her younger brother and sister alone with a complete stranger wasn't the issue, it was the fact that her daily fee was actually more than Sherry was making. So, out of sheer necessity, Gary and Carrie's responsibilities are forced to expand beyond simple housework. Since Carrie already had a degree of artistic talent, she began selling off her paintings for some spare cash. As for Gary, who had neglected to develop any profitable skills up to this point, he got to play outside. To his credit though, the kid does have a certain knack for salesmanship. Granted, I don't know how you're supposed to say no to a little bastard who set up shop right in front of their parents' tombstones. Honestly though, even with all the various factors working against them, things really wouldn't be all that bad if it weren't for the goddamn ghosts. It turns out the spirits of their dead parents are doing anything but resting peacefully. I mean, yeah, I'd probably be pretty salty too if I was the one person in history who'd been crushed to death by a falling satellite, but you've gotta be a certain type of asshole to go through the trouble of projecting a physical manifestation of yourself from the spirit realm for the sole purpose of scaring the shit out of your kids. I'm starting to think it might have been a good thing these two bit the dust.
Sometimes Dad is better.
Both of the ghosts are vengeful dickheads, but Mary is definitely the worst of the two, as she leaves a trail of puddles in her wake, which causes weeds to start popping up like, well, weeds. So not only do these poor kids have to deal with just being relentlessly harassed whenever she shows up, but they're also left having to clean up the mess this bitch leaves behind. Now you might think that the nanny's maternal instincts would kick in and she'd lend a hand, but you'd be dead wrong, as she seems intent on aggressively ignoring the whole situation.
I missed the part where that's my problem.
It didn't take long for the frequent hauntings and increased workload to begin to wear the kids down. They were often exhausted, sometimes to the point that they couldn't even make it into their beds, which often led them to fall behind with their schoolwork and neglect some of their secondary needs. And yet the family persevered. Despite dealing with her resentful dead parents, attending school, holding down a part-time job, and even managing to carve out something resembling a social life for herself, Sherry still somehow managed to find the time to hone the skills necessary necessary to advance in her career, which eventually culminated with her reaching the top of her field. Meanwhile, in addition to shamelessly guilting people into buying his flavorless lemonade, Gary's garden was also quite the profitable endeavor, even if I'd have to scale it down somewhat to make it more manageable for him. Honestly though, the real MVP was Carrie. While her first few paintings weren't worth all that much, and really just gave the family a little bit of walking around money, her abilities slowly improved, and in time, her works were being sold off for hundreds of simoleons each, and even when accounting for all the paranormal activity, she was usually able to knock out at least one every day. This steady and reliable source of income freed Sherry up to quit her job, which meant that there was no longer any reason to keep employing the nanny, and the family would instead hire a maid, which proved to be a far better use of their funds. But while the family was now doing well enough that they no longer had to worry about becoming acquainted with the repo man, Sherry had no intentions of being a freeloader. Instead, she sells off her car, then decides to put those handyman skills she had acquired to use by buying and restoring old junkers to flip for a tidy profit. Her investment quickly pays off, and after the sale of her very first car, the family finally acquired some much needed breathing room. So while the scamps might not have the perfect life, they have more than enough to get by and keep the state from sniffing around. And most importantly, they have each other. So I consider this to be a challenge successfully completed. What's up everybody, Dusty here, and I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you didn't, then I've got no clue why you're still here at this point. Like, what are you doing? But if you did, then why not leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel to be kept up to date with all my latest content. Or don't let me tell you how to live your life. Anyway, as always, thanks for watching, I'm out.